Hello and welcome to Selling Sheet Music, a podcast for composers, arrangers, and songwriters to learn more about publishing and marketing their sheet music. I'm your host, Garrett Breeze. Thanks for listening. This podcast is brought to you by HolidayChoirMusic.com. Give your choir the gift of new music this holiday season by commissioning a new work or choosing from our exciting collection of music for Christmas, Easter, Hanukkah, and other holidays. Use the code PODCAST at checkout to get 50% off your first order. Today's guest is Brittain Ashford, Executive Director of the Music Publishers Association, a trade organization focused on education and advocacy of issues pertaining to music publishing and print music. Their website, mpa.org, has a wealth of free information and resources pertaining to copyright, as well as information about their partnerships with other music organizations. We had a great conversation about the work of the NPA, the things self-publishers need to know about copyright, and the massive debt we, as a society, owe to the player piano. Brittain Ashford, thank you for coming on the show. It's exciting to have you.
Thank you for having me.
We had Kathy Fernandez on the show last year, and she spoke very highly of you and the MPA. So I'm excited to pick your brain on the organization and a lot of the adjacent issues, which probably are mostly going to be about copyright, but other things as well. And I think our listeners can largely sort of be divided into two groups. You have on one side people who are more aspiring composers trying to get into the business, students, that sort of thing. And then on the other side, you have more experienced composers, people in the industry, people working for publishers, that sort of thing. So I'm going to try and give you questions for both groups. That way everyone leaves happy. We'll see if I actually succeed or not. But
I'm ready for it.
But I'm trying not to ask you the same old questions everybody always asks about copyright. So anyway, but let's start with the MPA, because I don't really know much about the organization at all. What is the MPA and what do they do?
All right. So the short answer, the Music Publishers Association, it's a nonprofit organization really dedicated to educating people about copyright law and intellectual property, not only like for music educators, but also creating a community, really, and a line of communication amongst our publishers. With a goal of like bringing awareness and fairness and value to, I think like we'll touch on this, like it's a very specific corner of the industry. So that is our goal.
And how do you define the publisher part of that? Is it print publishing? Is it all kinds? Is it, because you have the publishers, the owners of the copyright, but then you also have the publishers, the creators, that are publishing and printing music. And sometimes the two get kind of mixed up.
Sure. I mean, for our sake, what we're doing mostly focuses on folks who are participating in print publishing. And, defined per our bylaws is any individual, partnership, association, limited liability company, or corporation engaged in the business of music publishing, which for purposes of membership of the association shall be defined as curating or editing and preparing musical works for publication and or publishing such musical works in printed or other form, which in this case means digital. So if you are an online-only company preparing work for digital distribution, that also counts.
Awesome. Does the MPA want individual publishers or independent publishers involved in the organization?
Absolutely. We actually have 3 independent publishers currently sitting on our board, which is pretty exciting. Our board's 20 folks. So, we really encourage that participation. I think that there's a lot of information we share as an organization that's really valuable, especially to those people who don't have a giant team that they're working with. If they don't have someone who's actively following trends or legislation on their behalf, there's so much we can learn from each other, particularly at the board level. There's a lot of board members who say, yeah, I learned something at every meeting. It might not even be laser focused on what their company does, but it's something that's interesting and we're talking about it. So I think it's really important to have people who are individual publishers, independent publishers, mixing with larger folks.
What does an independent publisher need to do to join the MPA?
The application process is pretty simple. You just need to submit 3 physical scores. So you can apply via our website, and it basically sends me a little form, and I take a look at the website that's linked there of the publisher in question, and I'll write them back and say, hey, thanks for applying. Can you send me 3 PDFs of work that you feel best exemplifies what you're doing, as well as a copy of your catalog that's currently available? And yeah, it's pretty easy. We try to make it painless. Dues for folks who are at a certain level, like I would say at least a third of our members are very small operations, so just individuals or representing 3 composers or fewer. And at that rate, dues are $50 a year, and then it gives you access to all the stuff that we do, meetings and events. There's a great holiday party we have every year.
It's largely based in New York, right?
I mean, the organization is based in New York, and historically, a lot of music publishing has been based in New York. But as you know, being based in Nashville, like these things change. A lot of publishing is in Nashville. There's definitely publishing in Los Angeles. So, folks are all over the country, but for the sake of gathering, our gatherings are always in New York. So our board meeting, our annual membership meeting, as well as our holiday party are all held in New York.
And if somebody is not a publisher, how can they get involved with the MPA and support what you're doing?
I mean, mostly like our focus is on our publishers. So if you're not a publisher, you can't necessarily be a member, but you can definitely sort of like follow along at home at sort of initiatives that we're doing.
I mean, like if you're a music educator, you're passionate about sheet music and publishing, but you're not actually creating works yourself. It's natural that you'd want to support an organization like this.
Yeah, I mean, we have all this information available for educators. Just obviously, it's for free. It is out there. But like, if you wanted to get involved, like have someone speak at your school, like that's something that could be arranged. And this is part of our initiative that we're going to be taking on in the coming, I want to say like it's a 3-year initiative to create just broader outreach for educators, to appeal to educators and create more content that folks can engage with. That includes like, having a live session where people can ask questions and having it be online so that people anywhere can dial in, and it doesn't cost them a fortune to get to New York and just, ask questions that are common.
Yeah. I'm curious on what your perspective is, but I get the sense, just sort of anecdotally even, that more and more composers are self-publishing their music. And I see that side of the industry growing really rapidly. Does that match with your worldview?
Yeah, I think that's really a question of access, and I think it has become so much easier to do that on your own and access tools that make it easy to self-publish your own work, including digital distribution platforms where you can be your own boss, engrave your own music and put it up for people to download and buy.
Well, and as you say, like with more and more independent publishers, I think the need for education grows with that because there are more people trying to do it on their own, and they don't have that sort of institutional knowledge that these larger corporations that have been around for decades have. And so I think the work that your organization is doing is extremely valuable, and I think probably will become more so just as this all sort of evolves. I should have asked this at the top, but what is your background as a musician, and how did you come to be the executive director of the MPA?
Great question. I have been with the organization for 17 years at this point. I moved to New York, and it was one of many, many, many jobs that I applied for. And it was particularly of interest to me because I am a musician, and never really thought I would find myself thoroughly invested in music publishing. I mean, truth, I don't know that I knew what a music publisher was when I applied for the job. I was just out of school, and it ended up being a really good fit for me because it's something I can be passionate about. And I really care about, the rights of creators, particularly as someone who's a composer and a songwriter myself.
It's funny you say that because I'm an arranger primarily, and from time to time, I'm sure we'll get into this later, but from time to time, I'll reach out to artists to get permission to arrange their song or to do something with their song. And half the time, the question I get back is like, I don't know. Like I don't like that, like that part of the business, publishing sheet music is completely foreign to a lot of people. It's just something that isn't really part of even for musicians, it's just very interesting. Like even within artists, the thing that we do is kind of niche and off to the side and not very well understood.
Yeah, it's again, I think there's a lot of people, a lot of my friends are like, wait, what do you do? Do you make sheet music? And I'm like, no, 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 like music publishing. And there's two different facets of it, right? There's like the underlying copyright, like music publishing, and then there's also like the actual what I think a lot of people think about, like a book publisher, like someone who actually makes the music on paper.
So is the reason for that just that like in ye olden times, the only thing publishing meant was to like physically print something? Is that where the terminology comes from?
Yes, yeah, and it goes, way back, certainly.
You had what is the phonograph and the publishing, right? Like that was it.
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny. It's like you can really get into the weeds on this stuff. Uh, but like modern day copyright law is basically based around player pianos, like player piano rolls. It's really funny. Like even like the phrase mechanical license goes back to like player pianos. That's how the law was set up, and a lot of that language has stuck.
So why hasn't the language been updated? Is it just Congress's fault, or is there some other more interesting reason?
Uh, I mean, great question. I don't want to place blame on a particular party. That's not what we're here to do. Um,
Well, both parties have had the chance, right? Theoretically.
sure, sure. No, no, I didn't mean like, ooh, not along party lines. Like, no, just is it the publishers? Is it government? Is it, because you could argue, like, all right, why aren't publishers pushing for faster change, and like why isn't government responding to what is already an issue? This is actually, I mean, super relevant even now. We have major publishers who want to pull their catalogs from not to be named social media outlets because they're fighting for better rates. And until the fight is really until it comes to a boil, it's always one of those things like we should do this. Like, it's not to say that people haven't been lobbying for better rates, higher rates. An organization that we work with a lot is the National Music Publishers Association. And, David Israelite is really out there on the forefront fighting for songwriters, fighting for publishers, fighting for composers to get better rates, mostly in the world of like streaming, which is
Mhm.
not something that like we as an organization, we're not focused on that, but we care because it's still relevant. And I think it is still relevant to a lot of our publishers. It's just not, we don't have the same amount of resources. And so that is not where we put our energy.
It's just interesting because you would think that all parties would have an interest in the language of the law matching the tools or the reality of what we're actually using day to day. It's just fascinating to me that we're trying to figure out, copyright and artificial intelligence and machine learning, but the law is literally, as you say, written for player pianos and like phonographs and like ye olden times.
Yeah, and that's something that I think is going to be really interesting coming out of the AI discussion, and the fact that the technology is moving so quickly. And as an industry, as a music industry, I'm not even talking about like the publishing facet of the music industry. The industry is just not moving as fast because the AI companies have more money and more resources and more time. I mean, it's so much bigger than just music. And in fact, most of the legislation that's coming out of Congress right now isn't particularly focused on music. It's focused on, cases with the New York Times and art. And, the music is not at the forefront, but it should be.
So, would you say the MPA is more focused on education for musicians, or is it advocacy with the government, or do you view those as the same thing?
I mean, our goal is education and advocacy, and it's a constant question, and it does change. Like, education of what? Advocacy for what? And so it's, you know, intellectual property and copyright education, which I think is really important to both songwriters, composers, and of course our publishers. The work that they represent really is our publisher and the composers that they represent. So making sure that both publishers and composers are aware of certain legalities, as well as the people who are using the music. I think we've had a strong focus on educating educators, like teachers, professors, instructors on, what you can and can't do, what you should do when trying to secure certain licensing.
And can you give us some examples of areas that the MPA is most focused on right now? Like, what is it keeping you up at night?
Well, I'd like to say there's not a lot keeping me up at night. Fortunately, I mean, not right
Good.
now. Get back to me tomorrow. Um, there are, again, historically, we've really focused on educational efforts. Right now, there are two resources available. One is for younger students, and it really, without being like too heavy-handed, is just supposed to help younger kids, like grade 5 and below, kind of just grasp the concept of intellectual property as it pertains to an artist. It's not even, again, it's not really focused on music. It's just sort of outlining what it is to create a thing and why you should want to protect that and why that idea is yours. So it's really meant to be easily digestible, something that a teacher could show to their classroom. And it's something like an art teacher could use, a music teacher could use, even a history teacher, civics, just like why it's important to value other people's creations. So that's for younger kids. And then we also have sort of a lesson plan for college level. It's called Copyright and You. It's a guide for college music educators. And that's for sort of instructing our future music teachers. So that's, the students who are going to be teaching high school, elementary. I mean, certainly even at the college and university level, but it outlines common questions that come into play in the classroom, and how, again, outlining the importance of why it's important to know these things and why we need to make sure our creators are compensated for their work.
Is that something that we can share? Where can people find that?
Absolutely. So the one that's for younger students, it's called I Made It, and that's available at imadeit.org. And again, there's a lesson plan that if teachers wanted to, they could print out, and it asks some questions with the kids to sort of like guide them. And then it has just a cute little animated short video. It's a couple minutes. So that's at imadeit.org. And then the Copyright in You is available on the MPA website.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll link to that in the show notes so people can find that a little easier. I would say probably most of the people listening to this show are involved in some level of self-publishing their own music. Is there a difference legally in doing that as an independent person versus like registering as some sort of a business entity? Does that have copyright implications? Is that something that needs to be a priority for somebody getting started in the business?
No, I think certainly not copyright implications. I mean, there's other legal implications that have nothing to do with copyright. For say, if you're trying to run a business, you want to file your taxes as a business person. If you're spending money on your new publishing entity, like you want to make sure you're keeping track of all your expenses and that you can separate that from your personal expenses. I think that's important. But it also depends on, where you are, if you're just getting started or if you're sort of a little deeper into it. But I think like if you've been doing it for a couple of years and you're getting commissions, schools and performing organizations are using your work, I think it's a great idea to register as some sort of business, be it, an LLC or just a individual. I think that is a useful tool.
But that doesn't change the copyright ownership in the work that you produce.
No, absolutely not. Like if you, Garrett, write a song, it doesn't matter if it's, just you or like Garrett LLC. It doesn't matter. The work is still copyrighted as you choose.
And my understanding is you have the copyright in your creation as a result of you creating it. It's not necessary to formally register it in order to own it. Is that accurate?
That's true. The common term is fixed form. Once a work is in fixed form. The most important thing, and I think that, again, historically, before a digital era, it was really important to have your stuff registered. And it's not to say that it's not important. But if you can point to a thing, you're like, yeah, I started selling this. If we're talking about sheet music specifically, like I started selling my song via this digital distributor, and you can see it's been available on this platform since 2021. And then someone came along and did the same thing in 2022. And you can say, no, mine came first. Like you can point to that. That's there, which is what it used to be. Like you'd have to, register something with the Library of Congress, and then you go and you pull it up, and it's,
Everyone
this.
says you have to put it in an envelope and not open it and all this stuff, right?
No, like that's in 2024, we don't need to be sticking things in envelopes or getting them certified or whatever. I mean, you can, but if you're going to do that, you should register it with the Office of Copyrights because
Might as well.
Yeah, if you could point to your even like your email, you email it to yourself. That is time stamped.
Mhm.
The main thing is like if you're potentially faced with an issue of copyright infringement, what it comes down to is like who has the upper hand there. So if a huge popular recording artist somehow you cross paths with them and they end up stealing your idea or whatever, like that is going to be a hard fought battle. And whatever you can point to be like, no, I did this first, will be beneficial to you. In a lot of cases, sometimes people engage in copyright infringement on accident or because they didn't know or it didn't occur to them, or even like we look at cases of like the Tom Petty, Sam Smith song, Stay With Me, Won't Back Down. You familiar with this case?
Yeah.
So for anyone who somehow isn't, Tom Petty ultimately was like really nice about it. There was no lawsuit there. He was just like, it's okay, bro. Like, these songs live in the ether. And, usually like, this happens all the time. And usually someone notices before it leaves the studio. But in this case, they are remarkably similar. And I think Tom Petty is actually credited as a songwriter on Sam Smith's song, Stay With Me. That was kind of a tangent. But like in an instance like that, two people who have created a thing that is very popular and they talk it out. There's no legal repercussion needed because it's so obvious.
Well, and everyone knows Tom Petty wrote that song. They don't need to go find the envelope that it was like time stamped with,
exactly,
to your point.
Exactly. Yeah.
I know there's not an answer to this, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
Okay.
Where is the line as to what is copyrightable and what's not? Like there's certain drum grooves that every song has. It's not like I invented four to the floor. You know what I mean? Certain bass lines, like I'm not the first person to use like all eighth notes on a 1 chord and then all eighth notes on a 5 chord. Like there are patterns that you see in all types of music. And where's the line between something that's standard that everybody uses, that's accepted as part of the genre, and something creative that I made, and this, I made this.
I'm going to preface what I'm about to say with I'm not a lawyer.
Yes.
This is not like legally binding terminology, but chord progressions can't be copyrighted. Song titles can't be copyrighted. Even, you can trademark your band name. But, we know there's a handful of bands with the same name over a couple decades, and again, people like fight it out for who's going to get more popular. But yeah, you're right. There's certain things you can't copyright. So when you're looking at, I'm trying to think of like notable cases, this is an interesting one. And I think actually the blurred line case really changed like how we think about copyright infringement, right? So the whole, the accusation was that the blurred line song like stole a feel, right? Like it wasn't even like the song, like they weren't like these 8 bars are the same as these 8 bars. It was like
it was the vibe.
It was the vibe. And that's, I mean, I don't like that blurred line song personally, but it set an interesting precedent moving forward. And of course there was a lot of like there were news articles that like, the case sets a bad precedent and our songwriters are scared. And like,
well, the jury was non-musicians, right? I mean, because if you play those songs for people that aren't familiar with the history of music over the last 20 years, like, of course they're going to say it sounds the same, maybe not understanding that, like, there's a million songs that sound like that.
Yes. Yeah. And so that's interesting. But then we also have like, this Ed Sheeran case that was just last year, where to his credit, he went into that courtroom and was like, here is the song that you claim my song sounds like. Let me play it for you on guitar, and sort of did it. And then he did his own song. And it was really, he made it really clear to the jury, who may or may not have been musicians. They were like, that sounds different than that. Release, this is dismissed. Like, I think we went out of,
So
I went out of tangents there.
no, but I like this. So what is a song? What is it that actually gets copyrighted? Because it appears in so many different forms, right? Like you could sing it playing at a piano, you could play it on a guitar, you could have a fully orchestrated, recording session with studio musicians, but they're all the same song.
Yes. So ultimately, it is the song, like capital S song, right? So your lyrics and your melody. And while you can't copyright the chord progression, if your melody over those very basic chords is strikingly similar, like that is your case for copyright infringement. But otherwise, yeah, your lyrics to the song are copyrightable, and the melody is copyrightable, and of course, like the arrangement itself also. Like if you're like, this is a specific arrangement of a piece. So this actually is more relevant probably to the conversation we're having. It's
Yeah, we're
like,
bringing it back.
but let's bring it back in. So if you make a bossa nova arrangement of a song from the musical Hamilton to be played by a jazz band, like, you made it. One, you need permission to do that. Let's just assume the permission has been requested and granted, and so you make
Lin-Manuel's on board. Yep.
yeah, he's on board. And once you have that permission, you have your arrangement, then you've made your arrangement, and that is your copyrighted arrangement of the piece. But the publisher still owns, like, because again, it's the words and the melody, right? The words and melody still exist in your very different arrangement of the piece, right? And so because you're arranging it in a very different way, you need permission. And then when your version of it is performed in a school or by an orchestra, then you're being compensated as the arranger of this very specific piece, as well as the original composer and publisher of the piece. So everyone's compensated. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So you need permission to arrange it in a very different way. And then you have that in fixed form. And you need permission if you wanted to, for say, sell it. It is completely at the discretion of the publisher whether they want to allow you to sell that.
So the terms of an arrangement license, like when you would go to Lin-Manuel Miranda and get permission for this bossa nova arrangement, are those terms coming from like the copyright code, or is it coming from just the inherited, contract that publishers have sort of used over the last 50 years? And I mean, there's certain terms that I see coming from different publishers. It kind of appears to me like that's the industry standard. I don't know if there was actually like a meeting in a smoke-filled room somewhere where they all sat down and decided, we're going to do 3-year terms for everything, right? But I guess when you're starting out as an arranger, it's hard to know what are things that are put in a contract because it is copyright law and that is how it's going to be, and what is put in a contract because that's what the publisher wants and they get to set the terms because it's their work.
A lot of it is the latter, and each publisher will have different terms, and sometimes those terms are determined by the publisher, and sometimes they're determined by the songwriter, the composer, and absolutely a mix of the two. And there's certain things that are just understood about copyright law. Like, again, this is how we interpret the law. But you can also, as an individual, decide that, you can create something and put it into Creative Commons so that people can do whatever they want with it. But it's at the copyright holder's discretion, which is like the joy and the beauty of copyright law, right? That like I, as a creator, can determine what I want done with my music.
I don't think anyone on the creative side learns how to handle this stuff in school. I certainly didn't as a composer. Like, I didn't learn about contracts and what things you should negotiate for and all that kind of stuff. So what's your advice to independent composers that don't have an agent, that don't have a legal team to go through all this stuff? Like, what are the basics of what you should look out for, and how do you educate yourself on those matters?
I mean, this is one of the reasons why organizations like MPA are important. And there's a lot of associations, not only for publishers, but, songwriters, where they have a lot of informational sessions that help to educate on things like this. But
Mhm.
I think there's also like a social aspect that is really important, that like you need to talk to your friends, you need to talk to your colleagues. Like, X company is asking me to do Y. Like, is that right? That seems weird to me. Like, you can't Google it because you're not going to get or like you can Google until you find the answer that you want. And it's not necessarily the right answer. If you know what I mean? Like, I think it's really important to talk to other people, and that's the best way to educate yourself. And to that end, also, I think there's historically this feeling of competition amongst your peers, even people you love, you consider them friends, in the sense of competition. And I don't think that serves anybody. I think it's really important that, like, you talk to people who are doing the same thing, not even like the same thing. You know what I mean? Like, you're
Well,
a composer.
it's just this idea that we don't want to talk about money, as artists, we're uncomfortable with that conversation. And what if I tell them I got 5% and they got 6%? Like, whoa, like I don't know. I think we're in our heads about this.
Yeah, and well, that's a great point, though, is that like, and again, this is my opinion as like Brittain Ashford, the musician artist. Definitely, like, I'm not saying this with like my business hat on. Uh, that I do think it's really important that people talk about these things, because that's how we discover discrepancies that are unfair, especially for people who don't know, because we don't teach it. We don't teach people going through school how to talk about money, how to ask for money. There's also this idea of the starving artist, that we should be grateful for anything that we're given. And like, you take what you can get and you build your career. And while some of that is true, like, you do need to build your career, and you do need to like make those stepping stones to get what you quote unquote deserve. It's like, if the work has value, then you should be compensated. There's no reason why one artist should be making substantially more, apart from, notoriety. I get that. If someone's like mega famous and, you're using them and it helps promote your brand. We see this all the time with the actors. Like, there's a reason.
You get butts in the seats.
Like, you get butts in the seats. Yeah, that's it. That's it.
So the way copyright was explained to me is that it's a bundle of sticks, and each stick represents like a different part of like what you can do with that song, right? Like there's the ability to make a recording, there's an ability to put it to video, sync it. There's the public performance stick, there's the displaying lyrics on a screen stick, right? Like there's all these different like things that you can do with a song. Hang with me, hang with me. Um, my question is, like, are all of those rights that are inherent in a copyright, do they all have equal weight, or is one of them prioritized over another? Like, is your ability to record a song, is that greater, or does that take precedence over like the ability to publicly perform it or even to create sheet music?
I mean, that's a great question, and I don't think that there's a single answer on that. I think it really depends on like the scope and purpose of the song in the first place.
I mean, the
Um,
monetary value is certainly different.
yeah, because the potential for compensation is different, right? Like, if you make a CD and you're selling it, again, that's just like something that I kind of actually love about a mechanical rate, is that it just like, it is what it is, and it's compulsory. So it's like, if you want to cover song, like, you get permission to do it. And it's, I forget what the rate is. The rate just went up, and that's exciting. It's like approximately 10 cents per song per unit.
Double digits. Yes, we made
Yeah, right. Finally. It used to be like what, like 9.7 cents, and now it's gone up, or it's about to go up, and then it's going to go up again. There's like three tiers, which, for however many people are making physical products, it's still something.
it. Yeah. Okay, this is a deep philosophical question, but um compared to other parts of the music industry or the entertainment industry at large, sheet music is like a very small portion, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So, because it's so small relative to other areas, how do we convince lawmakers that it's important to address our needs? Because there are things in the copyright code that could be changed that could benefit us. There's things like you said pertaining to rates and royalties and that sort of thing. How do we get people to care about our issues when compared to other parts of the industry, it seems not as significant?
Sure. I mean, I think this is with anything you care about, it's like, how loud can you be about it? And volume often is inherently tied to size, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the bigger you are, the more noise you can make, which again is why organizations like MPA are important. And if, we have right now, I think like 60 members. And so when we appeal to Congress about something, like there have been instances where we write about, there was a bill that was going through about just money to education for the arts. And so we, as an organization, we write and we say music is the fundamental backbone of our society. Like the arts are a fundamental backbone of American society. It is at this point in time, it's like our one true export, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's fostering both our young minds and our artists is imperative to our future as a nation, right? And like signed on behalf of X number of our members. And the higher that number, the better it looks. And again, they may not know, they may not understand, honestly, they might see, the major music publishers have more weight. Certainly what we're seeing right now with like Universal Music Group and like TikTok, like that's big. And, Universal Music Group can put that pressure on a company like TikTok because they're a giant versus like, if I was like, I'm taking my music off TikTok, TikTok doesn't care, but they care about other artists that are in that very large catalog. So it's like the more noise you can make, the better, which sometimes you make that as by being a giant behemoth of a company. And sometimes
Mm-hmm.
you make it by a lot of smaller companies coming together. Or a mixture of, small and big companies coming together. In the case of the MPA, we are large companies and small companies. We all band together because we all have the same goal, which is, fairness in our corner of the industry.
Yeah. All right, let's be nerds for a little bit, as if we haven't already
Yeah,
been
it's like,
nerdy enough. Have there been any cases about sheet music that have gone to the Supreme Court?
Yes. Really, like the mother of all copyright, as we understand it, stems from a 1908 Supreme Court case,
Yes.
which was a White Swift Music Publishing Company versus Apollo Company. Spoiler, this is about player pianos. But like that's the Supreme Court case that's sort of where we get most of our copyright law from. That like really was not, we didn't really address it again until like the 70s. But at the time, the court erroneously sided with the piano companies.
Great.
And it's funny because the thing that they said was humans can't read player piano rolls like they would read sheet music, right? Like they're not, humans aren't reading the player piano rolls. So they are actually copies. The copies of no. And so
Interesting.
as a result, like the publishers and the composers weren't getting royalties for these player piano rolls. And so, you got it like a year later, Congress overturned that. And that's where we get our compulsory license. So that just made it so that like any musician could copy another musician's song and just pay the rate. There was like a standardized rate.
Mm-hmm.
It's also, again, like what I said earlier, that's why we have the term mechanical, like, has it been like physically copying the thing? Again, at the time, we were talking about sheet music, but now, of course, it's like it's CDs, it's LPs and stuff like that.
Are there any laws on the books that actually reference sheet music, like with the words, or is it all just like derivative works and like catch-all language?
I think it's legally coded language. Again, like the work, capital W, the work, the composition.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, I think like as the law defines it, it's like the composition is copyrighted.
Awesome. Well, this has been a really fun conversation for me. I like going down the rabbit holes and the tangents about copyright. It's fascinating to me. Where can our listeners find you? Where can they find the MPA? Anything you want to plug before you go?
No, just, there's a lot of information on our website, and that's www.mpa.org. And Yeah, that's kind of it. There's a lot of information there. And of course, if you have a question following, listening to this podcast, you can always shoot us a message via the website.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again. This was really fun.
Yeah. Thanks, Garrett.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Selling Sheet Music. If you like the show, please leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can email Garrett at breezetunes.com to get in touch with me, and you can find my music at garrettbreeze.com. Selling Sheet Music is written, produced, and hosted by me, Garrett Breeze. Post-production for this episode was done by Jacob Mulaski, and our theme music was written by myself and David Dykstra. I'll see you next week. Now go write something.